السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. صدق الله العظيم. Yes, welcome back to another session. Today we'll be studying Sura Al-Aadiyaat, which refers to the charging steeds or the war horses that run straight into a battle. Right, now, just to give you some background to the surah, it is a Makki surah, meaning it was revealed in the period of the first 13 years of the revelation before going to Medina. Now, when we talk of the Jahiliyyah period, a Jahil is an ignorant person. So Jahiliyyah is the noun form of that period known as the age of ignorance. Now, this was the period in which the Prophet ﷺ was born into and lived amongst the pagan Arabs of the day. So basically, it was the first few years of his life up to the time of revelation. Essentially, what the community was based on was a tribal affiliation, and within tribes, they had clans or sub-branches. And because that was like the makeup of the society, naturally, there were intertribal conflicts rising from time to time, disagreements between people. Sometimes it was over watering places because in a desert, whoever has the water sometimes wants to monopolize on it and not share it with others. And so animals used to come there, and then there used to be sometimes little skirmishes and fights over who should get opportunity to drink from it or not. Then there was even pasture lands were also very scarce because it was essentially dry desert terrain, but the little bit of grassland that there was also a big premium for it because people had goats and sheep and horses and camels to put out to pasture as well. Then also, as part of the tribal sort of law or custom, they used to deify, meaning make gods out of their ancestors. In other words, when somebody great in the tribe, sort of a leader or somebody passed away, they would have his image or her image sculpted into stone. And then they ended up with time to even worship these sculpted stones of their ancestors. So that was the community base. Secondly, they loved warfare. And in the process, obviously, there was a high premium on horses because horses carried the fighting soldiers into the midst of battle. And camels were obviously good for carrying loads and going long distances. The third thing they kind of excelled in is they used poetry. Now, they were renowned poets in the day. They used to praise individuals in their tribe using the poems they wrote, and they defended the honor, even if through blood that was shed. So if one person from one tribe killed another member of the other tribe, then blood money had to be paid to this tribe that was the offending tribe. And they had that kind of arrangement. And once a year, they went to such an extent that just on the outskirts of Medina in a place called Ukaz, they used to have like a competition of which tribes' poets are the best and who could sort of spit out the best poetry of the day, praising their tribes. And it was like a competition between tribes as to whose poems were better. So they took great pride in this poetry sort of a Stratford, or I don't know what you call a poetry gathering, and they tried to excel in it and come out tops. Then the other thing they did is they honored their dead to such an extent that when they went to the grave of a dead person, the one person would actually claim that my dead person, this person that's buried from my tribe, is better than the dead person from your tribe that's next door, in the next grave, as it were. So they had this kind of rivalry even amongst the ancestry that they carried on amongst the living Arabs of the day. Then they had this weird notion of female infanticide where they felt embarrassed if they got a baby girl as a child and they would bury these girls alive. And there's a surah in it in the 30th para talking about this, that one day those people, those parents who actually did this horrific murder of killing an innocent baby a female, they're going to be questioned on it about it on that day. So, in any case, that was the norm of the day. Then, obviously, the other, the sins of the day were common, which was drinking, gambling, womanizing, dealing in interest, and usually it was very common. And then, obviously, it was embedded in polytheism because polytheism allowed them to do evil and then face their god, who was that idol, and kind of, you know, divide their lives up into what was so-called for God or for the idol, and what was their private life, which was their own business, and they could do as they please. Now, if you look at this Jahiliyyah period, that was the milieu of the Quran and the milieu of the Prophet's sort of teenage years and up to the time of the age of 40, and if you compare it to what he achieved over a period of 23 years, if you look at the final sermon that he delivered on the plains of Arafah in the Hajj, which was just a few months before he died in the 12th year after the Hijrah, the one thing that he broke down completely at the time was tribalism and racism. If you look at, and this fine print I won't read, you can read for yourself, I'm sure you've read it many times before, but essentially this tribal nature of the people was abolished through intermarriage, and even racism, in other words, in terms of color or any other form of, racism. Because if you look at Bilal from Habasha, he was a sort of black or darker in skin as compared to the browner skin of the Arabs of the time. So there was no sort of difference between Bilal and the rest of the Muslim community. Also, there was Salman al-Farsi, who we talked about previously, also coming from the Persian Empire. He also looked different from the Arab, but he was also accepted as a Muslim. And then between the Muhajirin and the Ansar, the Muhajir is the persons that made the Hijrah with the Prophet. From there you get the word Muhajirun or Muhajirin. And Ansar are the helpers, the ones that were the hosts of the Prophet in Medina, welcoming him to stay in that community in Medina and develop and set up the first Islamic state. Then, in terms of war, obviously there were wars also fought in the time of the Prophet, but this time there were, in the case of jihad that related to war, they had parameters as to what they could kill, how they would kill. They wouldn't torture, they wouldn't maim unnecessarily, they wouldn't chop up a body and, you know, use the body parts for something else. Nothing of that sort. It was a clear-cut sort of arrangement as to what is allowed when war became permissible, when fighting was made permissible in the Medina period, how to conduct yourself with dignity even in warfare. Right, so women and children were spared, the elderly were also spared, those that were like handicapped were also considered in, in a different way. And obviously, after a war as well, how prisoners of war were dealt with, everything was like kind of done within a compliance of a Sharia that spelled out how POWs must be treated, how people in war should be treated, and what you can do, what you can't do. So war became a regulated thing. But war was not only jihad. Jihad, in fact, in one of the incidents of the Prophet's life, when he came from one of the expeditions, he told his Sahaba on that occasion that, you know what, you've come now from a lesser jihad, which is the war that we just fought in, to a greater jihad, which is the life you need to now live as victors after that war. In other words, that personal sort of your dealings with people, your family, even the community, even people that are perhaps not like you, how you deal with and treat them, that jihad is greater than even going to fight in a war. So I think we need to keep that perspective as well, that while jihad is very, very sublime, and inshallah we can all become mujahideen one day and even die as shuhada, as people are dying right now. But beyond that, we also need to have the ones that are alive who don't participate in a jihad. We need to have our lives in order as well in terms of our good character and being ambassadors for Islam. Then in terms of the poetry, the Quran came and challenged all the poets of the day, and came out with such ayat that the poets were all flawed. They couldn't compare anything of their own writing to what was divinely revealed in the Quran. And the ayats were so powerful and potent that the Quran on one occasion says, you know what, you Arabs, can you compose anything like just one surah of the Quran? That was a challenge. And then they said, all right, if you think a surah is too much, because some surahs were quite long, they said, all right, just compose 10 ayat, just a few ayat. And this challenge apparently was taken up by one of the those Jahili Arabs of the day, and he tried to compose a poem to compete with the Quran. And actually, his colleagues around him listened to it, and they actually laughed at him and said, you know what, this is nowhere in comparison to anything that the Quran is. So just keep your mouth shut and don't even tell people you actually composed this thing, because it's an embarrassment. So that challenge stands from then till today, where even the best of poets of today in Arabic will never be able to compare to what the Quran has said. And it said it some 1400 years ago already. Then if you look at the way our dead are treated, the fact that we have Iman changed the way we looked at our dead. And also, the big concern we have is the fact that we believe in an afterlife, that there's a punishment or there's accountability in the grave, and then a punishment or accountability in the day of judgment. And in the process, we treat this sojourn in the grave as a temporary sort of stopover into the afterlife. So, with that kind of concept, you will find that we don't actually, like, I mean, we do honor the graves in the sense that we look after them, and we ensure that those things don't, the sort of the soil doesn't cave in and all that. We look after it in that sense, but we don't build fancy memorial tombs around graves. We don't even have a fancy burial arrangements and fancy tombstones that we buy going at great cost. Ours is a simple burial, and very important is we don't make any statues out of our dead people as well. Some people do have photographs, but that's about it. It's not that we worship those photographs or, make statues and worship the people that have passed on. And we also believe that the only three good things that you can do while you're living is that you can rear up good children and have good family relations to the point where one day when you are gone, at least those children or offspring of a family will actually make dua for you. They'll remember you. Secondly, if you did good actions by way of, say, teaching somebody something which they did something with, and it affected their life in a positive way, and you were the cause of that good action sort of coming into somebody else's life, then you will be given a reward for it in a sort of continuous format, because probably that person is doing it, is passing that good on to somebody else, and that person sending it to other people. And in the process, maybe there are hundreds or thousands of people that benefited from what, good words you did, or good actions you know, good words you said, on good actions that you did. And also, if you left like a good sort of work-off which benefited the community at large. In other words, you might have built a hospital or a clinic, or sponsored a child, or given a scholarship to somebody where they learned and they came back and plowed back into the community, or you built a mosque or an institution, something that where knowledge was imparted and it was of benefit to the community, that will also derive benefit for you even after you have gone. The next thing is we have respect for all life, children, adults, etc. And also, all the prevailing evils were ended, in a sense, by the Muslims in Medina. There's drinking, gambling, womanizing, dealing in interest, all that came to a stop. And the hikmah behind how alcohol came to be prohibited was that it allowed the, the early Muslims to go through three phases, because some of them were alcoholics when they actually accepted Islam. So the first verse that came out after about 2 years into the Hijrah phase was that while alcohol has got some good benefits, like for medicinal purposes, but the harm is more than the good. So it was a general sort of directive to the Muslims of the day to say, avoid alcohol, but it wasn't made compulsory that it was haram and you must stop it immediately. Then after some time, the second revelation came that don't come to prayer when you are intoxicated. In other words, if you have drunk something and you're still feeling drowsy out of it, then you shouldn't pray while in that state. So the fact that you had to pray 5 times a day and it's at different times of the day, it means you had to be in a state of mind to concentrate when you read your salah. And therefore, it was a gradual way of putting them off alcohol over time, because some of them who had it in their veins, as it were, they still would take a tot or two after Isha, hoping that by the time Fajr came around, they would be, over it, and hopefully they can then join the Salah. So they still kind of were half in the sense that they were drinking sometimes and not drinking sometimes. And then obviously when the final ban came, the streets of Medina flowed with all the wine and whatever alcohol was left, and people then made up their mind that yes, this is it, and we gave it up for good. Now, in this particular system, we have hikmah in terms of how to deal with drug addiction and other, addictive devices or things that we eat. Maybe it might be drugs, it might be hashish, it might be other things that are intoxicants, and we need to see how best to eliminate this over time, because sometimes this total ban doesn't work. You have to do it over phases. And, groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and others have this kind of treatment program that gradually wean you off these bad habits and turn you into something better and a more vibrant member of the community. And obviously, this whole thing is based on the idea that it's based on Iman and monotheism as the sounding rock bed of everything we do. So once you have that, then obviously all these other things flow naturally to it. Right, so that was just a broad background of the period that was of the time in the Arab Peninsula. Now, the surah we are about to do is about war horses and how they go into battle very bravely. Now, that was the context, and today we still have even all that kind of stuff in our lives today, where we have war games on computers and other gadgets. And today also our youth and people are generally interested in fast cars, fast planes, fast phones, and fast everything else. So in a sense, we still have these issues of the Jahiliyyah elements still in our society, even this century, but we need to refocus and get back to where we should be, inshallah, with time. All right, so let's move on to the actual surah. So Aadiyaat means the charges. Now, charges, I've got a little note here at the bottom that says a steed is a strong horse used for riding, right? So that's another word for the horse, a steed. The stallion is the male version and the mare is the female. And a charger is a medieval term used about 1,000 years ago for the horse that was used specifically in warfare. So that's how you get the word chargers, meaning horses that are like geared up or trained specifically to fight battles in a war situation. So here, this is what this thing is talking about. The surah is opening up with these first 5 verses describing who these horses are. What kind of horses are these? And when they enter the battle, how do they carry on, or how do they carry themselves and go into this war? So they ride very furiously into the midst of the fray of the enemy. And Allah uses, again, it starts off with the word. Now, we did say previously that the word can mean and it can mean by meaning like as an oath. So Allah is swearing by the charges that are dobhan. Dobhan means to snort or to make that loud noise with with their breathing heavily when they're going into this battle. Then Muriyat is like a synonym of Aadiyaat, which is the strikers or these horses that are moving in a small group. Qadhan, with the sparks rising from their feet after those feet of the horses hit against rocks. That's the terrain that these horses are sort of going through. By the raiders at dawn for Mughirat, another synonym for Aadiyaat and Muriyat is Mughirat. And in the broad daylight, these things are so brave that but even if the enemy is watching them, they are prepared to go headlong into the enemy. Then for Atharna bi Naqar, and as you look at them from a distance, you can see this trail of dust behind them. and these horses are moving to the forward into the enemy ranks. In cleaving, they're in a host, meaning they go straight in a group of the enemy that's in front of them without any concern about their own lives. They risking their life and everything, these horses, just to get in and serve the riders that are making this sort of impact into the enemy. Now that is the object, when it says buy this, buy that, and that, and that, describing who the horses are. But the point that Allah is making is that's just the introduction. It's like trying to paint a picture of the scene. The real thing, the subject is Innal insana li rabbihi lakanud. Verily, man is ungrateful to his Lord. Right? So, this issue of not showing shukr, being ungrateful, this is the main thing that Allah is trying to say, that you look at your horses. Your horses are so like subservient and willing and ready to fight on your cause, on your behalf. But you, man, when Allah tells you to do this, you don't want to do it. Or tells you to abstain from that, then you purposely go and do something. So when you are showing this kind of ingratitude, you are actually the problem. And if you compare yourself to a horse, the horse is actually better than you in this context of not showing gratefulness. Then, وَإِنَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ لَشَهِيدٌ, and indeed he himself, that is man himself, is a witness to the fact that he is not grateful. And there's other three qualities that come out here. The next one is, he's indeed avid, very, very like strong and severe in his love for wealth. He likes to acquire wealth, and he must have more and more and more, and nothing stops him from just getting more and more and more wealth. Right? So some people are in that mode or frame of mind that wealth is never enough and they just need more and more. Then the question arises, does he not know when what is in the graves is going to be turned over? So in other words, one day when you, the ungrateful person that you might be, or the one that loves wealth so inordinately, when you end up in the grave, don't you know that one day that grave is going to be turned upside down? Because that's what the description was in Ida Zulzila, the surah we did before this, and also when we're going to look at Al-Hakumut Takathur coming next. This is exactly what it's about. It's about a reminder of the day of accountability and the day of judgment. Right? So these graves are going to be turned upside down. And وَحُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, we had the word sadr before. أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ, have we not expanded for you your breast or your chest? So the sudur is a plural of sadr. So what is in the breast is going to be divulged. In other words, whatever you hid far away from people, not to be seen, like in other words, secretively you hid that in the deepest recesses of your heart, inside your chest, and people mustn't know that you're such an evil person or you did so and so bad and all the rest of it. All that you hid in terms of your sin and your evil, that day it's going to be divulged. It's going to come out in the open. You're going to be accountable for it. And then the last ayah says, Inna Rabbahum, surely their Lord, Bihim, is of them, Yawmaidin, on that one day, Lahabir, the best. He knows. He knows he's going to make it come out in the open. Okay, so let's look at the more detailed explanation of all these lines. Now, we mentioned the fact already that these Aadiyaat, Muriyat, and Mughirat are synonyms of chargers or strikers or raiders, that like a trained horses that go into the battle. The word is what starts off as an oath by, right? Allah is swearing by the fact that there are these kinds of chargers, war horses that you, O Arabs, you know about them, that when they run fast, they breathe heavily and they snort. They make that loud noise of gasping for air because they have been running so frantically and furiously. So he swears by something that you can see in front, plain sight. You can see these are war horses because the people riding them are also dressed in appropriate way, whether armor or not, and even with swords or spears or whatever. So these snorting charges, these horses that are going straight into the battle, then the next line starts with the fur. If you look at all these lines, got fur, 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 fur. So it means it's a continuation of the same image of these snorting chargers or these war horses. Then the other, the second line is talking about, as you look at these horses that were close to you, you could hear them snorting when they started their journey, right? They just ran a little and they were already snorting. And as they run like a little of a distance, now you can see sparks coming out from the rocks on the pathway of the horses, because as the hoofs of those horses go against the rocks, they pull out or they spark, right? So you can see little uh, sparks. So and sparks you can see during the day. Now this is another thing about these horses. They're so brave. They're doing it in broad daylight. Normally you'd use a horse and strategically you'll try and ambush an enemy in that night when they can't see. But here these horses are so brave, and even the soldiers on the horses are so brave. They're deciding to go headlong into a battle. And obviously in the desert, in the early morning, you'll get a little bit of moisture on the rock, so you won't see sparks if there's water. But in the later part of the morning when it's bright and the sun is out completely, obviously the water is dried up and now you can see sparks coming out of the hoof. So you can see this in a distance of say 50, 100 meters away from you. Then it carries on full mughirati subha. And these daring horses use subh. The sabah is the morning, right? They use the morning hours in broad daylight to undertake this raid or this ambush or whatever. And as they go into the battle, now you see they're going over some sand, and you can say that there's a trail of dust that rises up behind these horses as they move at this great speed. So this group of, and this art, the Aadiyaat, the art at the end, the alif ta shows it's a feminine plural for female horses, but at the same time it's a small number, like between 3 and 10. So it's a small group of horses that are raising this cloud of dust as they move into the enemy ranks. And for wasatna bi jam'a, they cleave or they go headlong or they split. They go straight into, wasata is like in the middle of, as a group, right? So jama, is a group, right? So they do this as a group and they go straight into the battlefield with no fear. They absolutely fearless and they do that. Now, these are if you look at it, very concise verses. Allah is swearing, and he doesn't even like use many verbs, like atharna is maybe one verb there, or wasatna is also maybe another verb, but essentially they're using nouns and like adjectives for these nouns, like other words that describe how these horses do and how they carry on. Right? So it's very, very precise, very concise, and amazing poetry. If you look at the way the layout of these lines are, it's almost like 3 words in a line. Here maybe a little more because of the extra preposition, and that all of them starting with a word of fur, and all of them ending in this rhyme scheme: dabhan, qadhan, subhan, naqan, jam'an. Right? So it's one rhyme scheme that fits this particular scene. And if you look at it, even your 5 senses get engaged when you see this kind of a scene, because dabhan you got to hear this breathing, this loud breathing of the horses. Qadhan you got to see the sparks on the ground. Then subhan, it's broad daylight and you can see it, right? And also the trail of dust is something you see, and these things are right there in the midst of the battle. All right, then we move on to the last part of the surah, which is what is the subject of the oath. Innal insana li rabbihi lakanud. Inna is surely or definitely or indeed. Insan, mankind, li rabbihi, to his Lord or to his sustainer or his Rabb. Lakanud is surely kanud. Kanud means ungrateful, insubordinate, disrespectful, not listening, not obeying. So this is the subject, what we need to ponder, that surely Allah is generalizing and says, surely man to his Lord is actually ungrateful, insubordinate. And وَإِنَّهُ, and surely he, that man himself, ala dhalika, on that, is a witness. Now there's a difference between shahid and shaheed. Shahid is like a witness at a time, like you have a shahid in a court of law where he's a witness in that case. Whereas with the shaheed, he's a witness, but for a longer time, longer period, right? So in a sense that man will always be ungrateful and man will always be noticing or being aware man is ungrateful. And why is it so? وَإِنَّهُ, and surely he, hubbul khair. Hubbul khair is the love for good things in this world. Could be wealth, could be money, could be prestige, pomp, whatever, anything good. He just loves it. The shadid. Shadid means very, very intensely, very avidly, very strongly. Right? So his love for this good things in the world is of a very, very strong nature. Then Allah poses a question which makes you think, Afala, does he think? Alima is to know, right? Does he not know إِذَا بُؤْثِرَ, that athara is to turn over, to turn something over like a mound of sand, you turn it upside down. Ma fil kubur, so that whatever is in the cupboard or kubur or graves, when that is going to be turned over, and in the process of that being turned over, like the bodies will come out, whatever is the remains of them, and the souls also will rise. وَحُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, and what is in their breasts will also come out in the open or get divulged and come out and be accountable for. Inna rabbahum, surely their Lord, the whom is their Lord, about them on that day is the most knowing. Lakhabir, is the best aware of what they have done in their lives, throughout their lives. So I think the three things that come out from this is we shouldn't show ingratitude. We shouldn't be insubordinate. We should always be the abd because our Rabb is telling us to be the abd. And also our love for wealth or love for the good things in life must be tempered with moderation. If you have too much and you go overboard with it, it can be a recipe for your own disaster. And also the third thing is the fact that whatever you hid in your deep down in your chest will one day surface and you'll be accountable for it. And let's hope that day for all of us goes easily. And if our day of accounting goes well, then Alhamdulillah, our our life was a success and we will be granted Jannah on that auspicious day. And obviously, if we didn't go that way, Jahannam is also on the other side waiting for the other people. So inshallah, let's hope we are of the former and not of the latter. And let us keep doing good, making shukr at all times, keeping our love for all the good things under control, and remembering the day of judgment at every walk and turn in our life, when whatever we do. So that I end today's lesson. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr, inna al-insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu s-salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqq, wa tawasaw bis sabr.